Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our monthly GPN Speaker Series event. I'm very proud to introduce Eric Mungai. He's the
Andrew, are
CEO.
you sure you've let everyone in?
I'm going to continue to let people in, Mike, as they come in. People are just coming in. I've let everyone in so far.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so I'm proud to introduce Eric Mungai, who's CEO and founder of Yazua Afrika.
Mhm.
Yazua Afrika is a nonprofit based in Nairobi, Kenya, where Eric is joining us, from where Eric is joining us today. It's evening his time. It is late morning our time here on the East Coast. And so, without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Eric, and he's going to introduce himself, and then we'll let Mike Nuckola uh, have a few words. And by the way, I'm Andrew Babson. I'm a co-founder and associate director of the GPN, and Mike Nuckola is the founder and director of the GPN. We also have with us Jackie Joyce and Flavio Barillo, who are also team members at GPN. Thank you. Over to you, Eric.
Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Good morning and evening and afternoon, probably, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Eric, as Andrew has mentioned, Eric Mungai. I'm the founder of Yazua Afrika, which is based here out of Nairobi. We are a non-profit that works with young men, boys specifically, between the ages of 9 all the way to 21, on masculinity, leadership, and social engagement. So we run our programs in schools and communities, working with sports academies, religious organizations, family groups, and we are happy, and I'm very, very, very happy to be here to connect with everyone. And I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you, Andrew.
Eric, we're pleased to have you here. I'm Mike Nuckola, founder of the GPN, along with Andrew and other colleagues. And the speaker series has given us an opportunity to feature the work of people like Eric, who are doing interesting things around the world. Andrew has been able to secure the participation of a range of interesting speakers. And Eric, you're the latest in that line. And I think some of the work you're doing in Africa right now is of interest to all of us on this call. And without further ado, let me give it back to you. We're looking forward to hearing your presentation and having a discussion with you.
Asante. Thank you. Thank you very much. Asante is Swahili for thank you. So you'll hear me say that a couple of times today. As I begin, I'd like for us, everyone who's joined in, wherever you're joining us from, just maybe share your name on the chat box. Who are you? Where are you from? Share your email address or contact, how we can reach you or engage with you, and why today's topic specifically is of interest to you. As you've heard, I'm the founder of Yazua Afrika, and Yazua is a Swahili word that means to forge. So you'll also hear me speak about forge a lot today. And just the process of forging young men and why that is important. And we've seen, and now we are aware, a bit more aware I feel like over the last maybe 2 or 3 years, we've just begun to embrace and to be aware of the situation and the current, the reality of young men in our communities. And it doesn't matter where you're from, whether you're in the US, whether you're in Europe or Asia or here in the continent of Africa, we are beginning to see the fallout of young men who are left unmentored. So today we'll just go through that. I'll invite you to participate. There are going to be questions. At one point, we are going to break us up into some groups and some discussions. You'll be given some questions for you to engage with and to just ask ourselves some questions and challenge our thinking around boys and boys masculinity and just the development of masculinity. And I'll also, through this process, also speak to you about what we do and what we think works and, what has been successful for us. So I invite you to, participate, ask questions. If you feel at any point that there's something that you want clarity on, drop it in the chat box and, I'm sure that we will come back to it. There's this, let me begin by, a quote, an African proverb that says, "The child who isn't embraced by his or her village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And I think as, as we are currently seeing everything that is happening in our world, be it whether it's in the business world or the political space, the presidents, the leaders that are being elected, the people who are taking power, and the people in positions of authority, we are beginning to see what happens when young men are left, when mentorship doesn't happen, especially positive mentorship does not take place, when we leave the development of boys to chance. So today it's about that. It's forging futures and sort of addressing the systemic struggles of boys and men in our society. My organization specifically focuses on young men and boys only. And I'd want us to talk about that and for you to see what happens when we fail to engage and to mentor, to target these young people in our communities and our societies. What's the silent emergency? Everyone is talking about it. I should have even maybe called this part adolescence. There's this Netflix show that I'm sure if most of us, if you've not watched it, you've read some commentary about it or you've heard people talk about it. And just what is happening with our young men. They are falling behind in education, mental health. There's a wonderful book by Richard Reeves called Of Boys and Men that, puts the case forward of what's happening to our young men, especially, in Europe and the US, the economic opportunities that are lacking. But society will assume that they will steal. And this has been the way that young men, society has engaged with young men for very, very long. They will figure it out by themselves. It's not only misguided, it's extremely dangerous. Research shows us that young men spend upwards of 6 hours a day on their phone by themselves. And this is the part where we imagine that we are leaving them to figure things by themselves. We are more worried about them spending time in the outdoors and playing with others and wondering who they are spending time with than we are with what or who they engage with online and the influences that are found on online pages, and whatever struggles that our boys are facing today, they are going to be the unresolved crisis of tomorrow. The struggle of identity, the struggle of purpose, the struggle of meaning, we begin to see the fallout when they start to hit their mid-20s, upwards, 30s and upwards. When there's just a general malaise in society. Young men don't show up for work, they're not interested. We see that the numbers of young men joining higher education have dwindled over the last 20 to 30 years. We see that young men are no longer interested in trade. They don't go to trade schools, and for us here in the continent of Africa, it's one of the most important pathways of employment for the youth. And just young men just beginning to fall off the radar around those things. Globally, there are 128 boys who are out of schools. Yeah, they are more likely to disengage or repeat grades. They leave the system entirely. As we have this discussion, just think about what are some of the things, that you see in your society, in your community, what you call your village, in your neighborhood. How are the boys checking out? What are the things that they are doing? What's the state of their mental health? And what dark holes are they falling through and into? Depression, addiction, gambling, suicide. We rarely speak about them. We rarely talk about them, but they're the crisis that is actually affecting our boys in unimaginable ways. We expect, and we place this expectation and this idea for our boys that there is a stoic mindset about what it means to be a man. And interestingly, that's how they get pulled into the online pages where that is the topic and that is the message. And we begin, we're constantly pulling them back in and telling them, no, this is what it means to be a man. Let's go back to the old way. Yeah. And what happens is that they come out into a world with no purpose, and they meet a world that has moved forward around gender equity, and they find that they have no place. And what happens is that they either crumble, they either fall, or they fight back, or they become a threat to society. And caught up in this idea that life is about just having a good time. Next Friday, I call it the next Friday mentality. They're caught up in fun, excitement, play. They don't do anything. They only get involved in economic activities to make a quick buck so that they can spend it, so that they can have a good time, so that they can party, so that they can gamble, so that they can be in the newest place, so that then, they can be in a yacht somewhere and take videos for Instagram and seem to participate in society and in life and just to have a good time, leaving them displaced, lack of future opportunities, no goals, no desire to think long term. They have this short mentality, and that's the next Friday mentality. They plan for next Friday only. You ask a young man, what's your plan for the next 5 years of your life? He's clueless. They do not know. And they actually don't know. It's not that, they're just being arrogant or anything. They just simply do not know, because there is no part for them to participate. And what happens is that then we have this pyramid, which I call the masculinity paradox of there's the weight of provision at the very top. We want them to provide, we want them to show up as this idea that we've had of masculinity. But then there is missing scaffolding around them. There are no support systems. They are lost. The pathways that used to define masculinity, and those are rites of passages, and we'll talk about rites of passages as well, a few minutes after this. But just those pathways are no longer there. And the scaffolding was meant to protect the boy and to remind him that he's fine despite the challenges, that he can weather the storms of life. And that scaffolding tended to be the community around him. It would be the men, it would be the coaches, it would be the grandparents, it would be the uncles, it would be the older cousins, those men who stood around him and sort of helped him navigate and withstand the storms of life. That is completely lacking. And what has happened is that we've left them by themselves. I have this image when I think of the scaffolding in my mind for young boys, especially around the rites of passage process, is here in the continent of Africa, there are some communities where the boy is armed and told to go into the bush, into the wilderness, and into the forest to hunt down a lion. And I feel like what has happened over time is that we've cast our boys from the village and lined them up along this, the boundary of the village. The village begins here. This is the boundary between the village and the forest. And we've cast them to be in the forest, and they've become these children who are lost in the forest. And we want them to go in there and then come back as men. And even when they come back, we turn our faces away from them. We ignore them. We don't embrace them. We don't welcome them. But even more insidious is that we teach them, we give them a blueprint of what it means to be a man that has been passed by time, that doesn't work anymore. And when they come back into society feeling so great about themselves, have achieved this amazing person, they come back into society and they realize that, oh, I thought I needed to bring the bacon home. And it looks like the bacon I'm bringing is no longer enough. And it doesn't assign the value that I thought it was meant to assign to me. So that scaffolding is very, very important. The pathways of masculinity, the rites of passage and the processes of what it means to be a man is very, very important. But then even further than that is, and that is actually the biggest chunk, is just the systemic neglect. Whether it's in education, whether it's in our health systems, whether it's in economic opportunities, we have neglected and completely almost erased the concerns and the needs of young men. So this is not a crisis of individual failing. And we deal with the issues of boys as if they are individual failings, but they are not. It's systemic neglect with consequences that tend to rip through our families and our economies and our societies with devastating effects. So why does this matter globally? Of course, the fate of boys is, the fate of nations. I've always felt, and just allow me to come back here, that boys what the direction that young men take in society largely determines the dignity, security, and safety of everyone else in that society. When they falter, economies contract, crime rises, there's disillusionment. We begin to see a lot of extremism, whether it's religious or violence. And for many, many years, for generations, civilizations, boys were used as, and it was almost as if that it was used as a format and a form of the scaffolding to prepare young men to come back into society. They went to war. They were, within the ranks of military and security. They played the role of protector. But that is no longer true for our world today. We no longer go to wars. And those tools for male development that have disappeared have left a multitude of boys adrift. And when that happens, of course, extremism takes root. And some of the extremism that we're beginning to experience and witness is, the online misogyny that is taking place, whether it's, and everyone talks about Andrew Tate. He's become the poster boy for everything that is wrong. But it's more insidious than that. It's deeper. It's the buffing, let's go to the gym, the stoic mindset, and only stoic mindset. It's how to talk to a woman, how to treat a woman, all these different things that we've continued to pretend that they're not there, that we've left our boys with the gadgets, with no scaffolding, and with no support, with nothing outside that space to empower them. And what happens? Fractured societies, lost potential, futures that are unbuilt. Yet we are happy, and currently what is happening in the UK, to just churn out these policy briefs and talking points, but we fail to do the actual work. And the actual work is about engaging with boys, finding them where they are, engaging with them, talking to them, being aware and awake to the nuances of the realities of where they are, whether it's whatever unique state they are in. Seth Kaplan, a writer who's written about fractured communities, does say something that is very, very powerful. That fractured states, some of the ways to heal is belonging, identity, trust, some local institutions, and relational infrastructure. That's how you heal a community. That's how you heal a society. And belonging and identity is extremely important for boys. Yeah. When boys feel that they don't have that, they begin to drift. And we've seen that with our generation, an entire generation, crisis of direction. I don't know who I am. I don't belong anywhere. Yeah. Lack of rites of passage, like I mentioned earlier. And for centuries, we understood that masculinity and boyhood was shaped, refined, and tested. It was shaped. There was formation. Today, the process is no longer there. In its absence, boys construct manhood from fragments, whatever fragments they find. They find those fragments in the digital space, ideologies that promote strength, but breed resentment against the opposite gender. Yeah. A macho and gym-ripped capitalistic mindset. I want to make as much money as possible, as quick as I can. Therefore, inviting spaces for corruption, stealing, and lying, just breaking the moral fabric of society. Then what happens? Majority of them begin to fall through the cracks. 70% of young men globally account for school suspensions and make up for the majority of high school dropouts. In this country today, 67% of young men are unemployed. They are feeding cycles of crime, radicalization, and despair. Yeah, they are not in employment or education. Drugs, gambling. Gambling is one huge thing that just seems to have taken the hearts and minds of our boys. And it has done so because it's about quick money. Make as much money as you can so that then, next weekend you jump onto this party train. And then, of course, what happens? Drugs and alcohol abuse to sort of numb the sense of being lost and despair that they carry with them from Monday to Friday. So Monday to Friday, they are working, they're the gig economy, they're trying to get the quickest back that they can and then jump right back in, then finding these communities, and they become echo chambers of everything that is wrong around what it means to be a man today. Yeah. Amplifying the old models of masculinity that are not only dangerous, but destructive to society. Then, of course, the simple vacuum of mentorship. And I know that for many people imagine that mentorship is about having a dad at home. And that is good. But I believe in the concept of a significant male figure, because even through the civilization of humanity, boys were mentored by the community. It was significant male figures that took on the role of mentoring, apprenticeships, showing up, being available physically and emotionally and even psychologically to speak to these young boys. And that's the thing that these online spaces have done so well. They filled that gap. When we stopped showing up in our communities and in our neighborhoods for our boys, they swept in and, they became the places where boys find meaning and purpose for life. I got into this work, working with young men and boys, largely because of my own experience and how I was brought up by my granddad. And I share this story a lot, and I'd like to just help us understand why this is very, very important. My mom was a teenage mom. She gave birth to me when she was very young. So after she gave birth to me, she went back to school, as is the norm in this part of the world. She went back to school and left me at home with her dad. So my maternal grandfather is the one who brought me up. And I grew up not only poor, but in a neighborhood that was, rife with crime, alcohol abuse, drugs, all manner and all sorts of things, negative influences. But my granddad very, very actively took on the role of having me sit down and read. And he'd get this novels and magazines, and he'd have me sit in front of him and read. Just read. I want you to read that story. And at times, he'd come home with a torn novel. It began at page 20 and ends at page 130. I have no idea how it began. I have no idea how it ends. But it became a thing that I used to do. At first, I hated it. I wanted to be out playing with other boys. But the more he did it, he did that for me, having me sit in front of him and read to him almost every evening. It was almost a daily thing in my life. And when holidays came about, he'd have me volunteer in a community center where I'd spend time again seeing men doing things, men and women participating in positive things for society. That was a mentorship that shifted the trajectory of my life. So when we talk about significant male figures, we are talking about people showing up and being in spaces that can impact positively, teaching boys how to show up, boys seeing and mimicking and sucking in that masculine energy and essence from positive male figures. And it could be you showing up in your community and deciding, in my neighborhood, I'm going to be hosting a monthly book club for boys. And we'll just sit outside on a Saturday evening and just 2 or 3 boys, let's read a book. Yeah, let's have a bonfire and roast some marshmallows or something. Maybe once every 6 months, go out for camping or hiking or do an outdoor activity with those boys within your community. It falls on us as men, especially positive male figures, to begin to actively participate in our communities and participate in our neighborhoods in shifting and changing the trajectory of young men and young boys. Some of the solutions and some of the programs that we have that I'm going to share with you right now, Forge, which, like I mentioned, Forge is about forging something. And men are made. We imagine that a boy born male automatically becomes a man, but that's not true. I think we have enough examples in our societies. We have enough individuals that we can look to and realize that boy was not made into a man. He's grown up, he seems to be a man, but he still has a boyish nature to him and behavior and certain things. So a rites of passage initiative is not only important when a boy is transitioning from, his early teens, from his teenage years, or to being a young man. That's not the only time that a rites of passage is important. We all go through different rites of passages, even though we are unaware of them. A young boy transitions from being a young boy and begins to become a young man. He transitions from being a young man into a young adult, participating in ways that are both economically viable, but also bringing dignity into his lifestyle. Who is he? He's answering the question of your identity and meaning and purpose. Then, he gets married or has children or, finds a partner. Then he becomes an old man and begins to look back at his life and collate all the wisdom and knowledge he has acquired over the years and begins to give it back to society in the form of wisdom. Those are all different stages of rites and of passages that we have lost as a community and as a society, as a people, as a race. They disappeared. They are no longer, we don't see them. We don't mentor the young man who's behind us, whether it's in the corporate space, in our offices, in our organizations, whether it's in our homes. We don't have a process where we mentor and bring up young men, because it has to be structured. There has to be intentional growth. Yeah. Find monthly challenges, outdoor leadership experiences, or one-on-one mentorship to just shape men who lead with purpose and some wisdom. Sit down with each individual boy in your neighborhood. Go for ice cream, go for coffee, invite them to your home, sit at your yard. Yeah. Even just have a young man come and moan, your lawn or something. Purpose-driven masculinity, shaping boys into men who lead with integrity and contribute with purpose and build rather than withdraw. Begin to shift away from the idea that masculinity is about roles and roles alone. Yeah. Let it not just be your community, but find ways to scale it. Can you do it in your school district? Can you do it away from your neighborhood, whether you go to a sports club, whether you're in a religious institution? Can it be scaled? Can it begin to impact, other than your small locality? How far can it go? How many men do you think you can come together with to start to have an impact, to have a meaningful impact, and moving away from mere survival to leadership, ethical responsibility, and purpose? And shifting away from this false binary that we imagine and we think that if we do anything for boys, then we are taking away from girls. Because it's not a zero-sum game. Neglecting boys harms everyone. The same way neglecting girls harms everyone. Advancing one should not come at the cost of neglecting the other, and vice versa. Because societies that fail their sons fail their daughters too. Yeah. Half the population being left to grapple with meaning and agency and purpose is a dangerous gamble. Because we've seen disengagement does not just harm men. It threatens the stability of families, our communities, and nations. Because when boys feel unseen, they do turn to ideologies that promise identity but deliver only hunger. And that's what the manosphere thrives on neglect and filling the void where mentorship should be. Another solution is the I Decide program. And this is one of our models that we employ actually in high schools and our communities. This caters for young boys between the ages of 13 all the way to 17. And it just answers the question of what decisions are you going to make? Because every boy must be helped to know and understand that his decisions determine the quality and outcomes of his life. He decides how far he will go in life. So I Decide is a model that we developed that defines masculinity on values. Each of those letters signify a value that we not only champion, but we believe in. We say a man, first of all, has to figure out his identity. And the identity part is him sitting down with his community and asking them, what's our history? How did we get to where we are? Who was my great-grandfather? We go back up to 3 generations. And if you can go up to 5 generations, even better. But on a minimum, we ask them to go back 3 generations. And from those 3 generations, what we ask for is not just the name of the individual, I don't want your grandmother's name. I want to know, I want you to find out what was her story, what were her values, what were her failures, what were her mistakes, and what were her successes. And then from each individual, come up with a short list of about 3 values, powerful values that define that individual. Come up with minimum of 3. And as you come up to the point where you're talking to your dad and your mom and you're finding out the history of who they are, and if that person is not there, find out the history or the stories of those people. But the idea is for these boys to come up with a set of values that have led to them being here today. And those values, then we try to align them back into the decide model. And the decide model is that a man is disciplined in action, in behavior, and in thought. A man is excellent in everything he does. There is excellence. The C is about character and creativity. He has character and he shows up in society and in life, but he's also creative. He looks for solutions to the challenges that are found within his community. Then there's insight and integrity. Insight is about, am I learning? What am I learning? What do I need to unlearn? What insight am I gaining about the realities of our world today? And then the integrity to show up in situations, to seek responsibility and to show responsibility. And then drive and determination. Am I driven? Am I determined? Do I follow through? And do I have a community around me that helps me to do so? And the last letter, E, is about empathy. How am I connecting with everyone around me? Because we must begin to show boys that they are builders and not destroyers. That they should be open to learning and to change. Yeah. And that their life lessons and the lessons and experiences will inform the decisions they make. And those decisions will inform the outcome of their lives. So it's a scalable curriculum. We actually make it available to communities. And we've been running this program in schools for the last 7 years. And now we are beginning to actually engage with schools that are outside the capital, which is Nairobi, and in other countries, in Johannesburg, in South Africa, Johannesburg, in Zambia and Lusaka. We're beginning to engage and partner with other organizations that are, get the program and the training, and they are able to implement it within their communities. So I'm saying all this to just say this, that we need to rethink the way we develop boys. We need to rethink where we meet them, how we meet them, and what we do with them. And we also need to break away from this concept or this idea that a boy and a young man, is wrong. We need to stop, to break away from telling them that something is wrong with you and you're trying to correct it. Because that's not true. The boys and the negative outcomes of who boys are in society is more a failure of us, our society, than it is a failure of their own personal failings. So begin to engage with them and to respond to their needs, creating spaces and places where boys can be positively impacted and mentored. A space and a place like I experienced, a community center where some programs were being implemented, some mentorship experiences, where I was involved in a very hands-on way to do and to be responsible for certain things. From the age of about 13 until 19 years of age, I was actively involved in that community center. And that is what led me to begin to work with boys. So a question for us who are here today: how do we develop a new and ambitious format of being, not just for boys and men, but for society as a whole? Because it surely does feel like we've lost the script somewhere. We lost our boys somewhere. And we need to start moving and shifting the idea that masculinity is about competition. And we need to start teaching them that it's more about contribution than it is competition. It's about impact, not domination. What are you doing in your community? It's about brotherhood over hierarchy. And brotherhood is not just about their peers. It's for them to see that this young man, this friend, this cousin, who's just a few years older than me, is here, is part of the scaffolding that helps me to define who I am. He's one of the people that I'm looking up to and, learning from. Yeah. Accountability of authority. I'm not just trying to control and put people down and, speak the loudest and be the strongest and being the most arrogant, but I'm actually an active and equal participant. So the call for action is simply this. For educators and policymakers, how do we design schools and policies that support the unique development needs of boys? Encouraging participation in activities, more field activities and hands-on experiences that nurture and build character. Because it's not just about adding more male teachers to schools. It's about the structural issues that are within our spaces of learning and development for boys. For leaders and people in institutions, invest in mentorship, rites of passages, and leadership training programs that equip boys for meaningful adulthood in service and responsibility. Support organizations like Yazua and so many organizations that are out here that work directly with young men. And of course, for us to stop seeing boys as a problem to fix and see them as a force to build, because they are a force to build. I'll finish with this quote that says, the future of masculinity is not about reclaiming the past. It's about forging something new. And that future starts with how we raise, mentor, and equip our boys today. So as we break into our small groups and begin to just maybe tackle some of the questions that Andrew is going to share with us, I, of course, want to hear from everyone here. What are some of the ways that you can begin to actively mentor and support the development of boys? How do you support them? How do you encourage them? What do you think, and you don't have to answer this question today, but some of the questions I want you to leave here with is, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing boys and young men today? When we discuss gender equity, how often do you think the issues of boys are challenged, boys' challenges are addressed? Who do you believe should take the lead in addressing the crisis facing boys and young men today in our society? And what do you believe is the most critical shift needed in how we raise boys? Those are some of the questions that we won't, I'm not saying that we'll answer them today in this discussion and webinar, but these are important questions for us to begin to ask ourselves in our societies and in our small communities and with our friends. And, beginning to engage and learning about what is happening in our society, what is actually really, really happening. And how do I, in my own small way, do something? Like I said, my granddad was he wasn't a psychologist, he wasn't a sociologist. He was just a man who figured that if I don't do something for this boy, his life outcomes will be dire. And I, as a man and as his father figure, will suffer the consequences of those outcomes. Remember that if we don't do, and I usually say this, and I don't know any other way to say this, but I feel like it just gets the message home. It ruffles a few feathers, but constantly saying if we don't do something for boys and men, we will have done absolutely nothing for women and girls. I know that is uncomfortable to hear and sit with, but when you really think about it, you begin to see that our leaders, our presidents, and I can speak for both almost, we feel like the US has a format of the president we have here in Kenya. These are people from the same coin. And we have a joke here that we say about our president. He is a direct outcome of a man who was not positively mentored. So those men who come and just go up to positions of power and authority and influence, what do you think their impact will be in our society when they are not mentored? And what could be the outcome if we just had a few thousand more granddads like I did, who help young men, who sit with young men, who find ways to mentor young men? What will be the outcome for our society? I'd like to imagine it would be amazing. I'd like to imagine that every sphere of society will be healthy. Thank you. And that marks the end of my presentation, and I'll, as we finish, I'll say a few things. But thank you, Andrew. I'll hand it back to you.
Eric, that was fantastic and very impactful and very informative, and it's given us a lot to think about. And so what I'd like us to do, I'm going to share my screen here, and I've got some questions that Eric has put together. There are 4 questions, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 4 breakout rooms, and I believe they will be numbered 1 through 4. And what I would like each breakout room to do, I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. I want to make sure I'm sharing the correct screen. So I would like breakout group 1 to focus on the following question. What do you think is the biggest challenge facing boys and young men today? Breakout room 2 can focus on, when discussing gender equity, how often do you think boys' challenges are addressed? And then the third one is, who do you believe should take the lead in addressing the crisis facing boys and young men? And then finally, what do you believe is the most critical shift needed in how we raise boys? So I'd like everyone to just have a look at these questions for a bit. And then in a second, I'm going to assign everyone to breakout rooms, and feel free to use these questions as a starting point. Maybe the conversation will go in any direction, and that's fine. But these are prompts for you to discuss in your breakout groups. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go over here to the breakout room function and create some breakout rooms. And finally, I would like everyone to spend about 10 minutes in discussion groups. I think that would be a good use of our time, to spend about 10 minutes. And then we'll regroup. We're going to be wrapping up around 12:15. And what I'd like to do is spend about 15 minutes having a dialogue where anyone can jump in and talk and have a nice conversation. If we go over a little bit, over 12:15, that's fine too. If you have to leave early, no problem. Okay, so I'm going to create some breakout rooms. Here we go. I do. It means love.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. I my Spady is not what it used to be, but
Hey,
yeah.
I'm
Sepedi.
impressed that you even know
Wow.
Spady, Andrew. I am. I'm very impressed.
Eric, this is the person that needs to teach you Sepedi. Andrew, that's actually my home language, Sepedi,
Nice.
but I don't speak it because I was born and raised in Joburg. And
Okay.
Sepedi actually comes from the northern part of South Africa.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where our family comes from.
What part? Do you know, do you mind? Because I
Little.
lived outside. I lived in Turf Loop. I
Oh,
lived, yeah,
yeah, that's like Mankweng, right?
yeah, Mungai. Yeah, I lived there for like
Yeah,
4 years.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Our family comes from Muleji, which is not too far
Glitchy.
from.
Yeah. I know
Yeah,
exactly where it
yeah,
is. Yeah.
yeah.
Awesome.
That's where my family comes from.
Oh,
Wow,
awesome.
how
Yeah,
small is this world?
I know. So I want to be able to say Tobera, and then
Oh,
I haven't been able to say that in a long
heartwarming.
time.
Realocha.
So
Awesome.
Andrew, can I say something? Because I know I scheduled us till 12:15 and I have to go right at that time, but I had a
Absolutely.
wonderful conversation with Lorato and Leah, or Leah, either way we want to say it.
Okay.
Really about the importance of mentoring for boys, even when boys are cared for by caring mothers and women. And I've experienced that as well. And we talked a little bit about the natural mentoring that can occur in different contexts. Like in Lorato's case, she has a 19-year-old son who now is connected with a university instructor, I think, if I'm not mistaken. And one of the things I take away from that, we didn't have a chance to talk these things through completely, but it's never too late to start mentoring. You know, we'd like to start with young boys, children and young boys and girls, but if that doesn't happen, we shouldn't give up on our young men. We should find ways to connect them. And I feel so strongly about that myself from my own experience. So just figured I'd get us started with a summary of that, Andrew.
Mike, thanks. That's great. And I would like to invite anyone to jump in and just have a conversation. And I'll just repeat something what Mike was referring to. We will wrap up at 12:15 if the conversation has come to a natural conclusion. But I also would say that if you can stay on and you would like to talk further, you're invited to do so. So, Jackie, I'm wondering if you might be able to volunteer some ideas from our chat.
For sure. We were talking about the fact that our experiences probably shape our perception. I mean, I grew up with all sisters, went to all girls school, wrote my college essay about the subtle sexism I saw when I transferred to a co-ed school. So I think that experience obviously shapes our perspectives. But then Andrew and I were talking about how the skills that have been built through evolution, like to protect, to provide, can also be used to destroy and to use violence. And so as someone who's a therapist and as an educator, I work with a lot of men and particularly people in drug and alcohol recovery. And it's been really fascinating how a lot of the skills that people have or have evolved to have over time, the way that society interprets how to use those skills has a lot of power. And so I've even seen with some of my clients that the same skills that probably made them really good in addiction are probably the same skills that would make them super successful in their future career. But how do you help them channel that? And that's through mentorship from what I've seen.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joyce.
Let me volunteer Brandon to share because I feel like it lines up with what Jace has just shared from our group. We had a lovely discussion with Brandon and Flavio.
Yeah, so we were mostly discussing kind of my foray into being a mentor for student athletes age kind of 18 through 21 and kind of what their experiences have been and what kind of saying kind of a lot, what struggles they've had. We talked about kind of their anxieties surrounding talking to women, and more importantly, some of the older students are starting to have struggles with their identity. They've been high-performing students and high-performing athletes for 10 to 15 years, and now they're stepping into the world. One of them is going to go work for, I think, Pico. Another one is about to go to medical school, and our third graduate is, just deciding he doesn't want to live in Canada anymore, and he's moving to Tampa Bay. So all three of these students, I've talked to them separately about anxieties of stepping out of their comfort area. They're all stepping into being adults and having all the responsibilities that come with that. And, in my small effort, trying to support them through that, I'm just trying to tell them, hey, I'm in my late 20s now. I had all these issues you all had, and I stepped out. The path wasn't exactly what I thought it was, but here I am. I'm doing all right, career-wise, socially. My body is still not falling apart, so you guys are going to be fine. And Eric suggested maybe to bring in some, notable alumni who passed through our program, someone with maybe a little more authority than I, a little more wisdom to maybe come and give a discussion or host a discussion with these men and you know, this mentor that if I can find one, hopefully.
I would say in the meantime, Brandon, it's great that you're doing the work you're doing because
Mhm.
we can't wait for Superman. We all have to be the man we
Yeah,
can be.
Thank
exactly.
you.
And
Thank
you know,
you.
stepping into that role, I'm happy to do it because, you know, I was in the same exact position they were at their age. So
Yeah. I Eric and Brandon and Andrew, just want to mention something Leah said in our conversation. The importance of men holding men's hands, whether you think of that literally or metaphorically, men being there with men. And it made me think of the three words that come to mind for me for positive masculinity: love or care, like holding hands, love or caring for people; honesty, which we're missing dramatically in the United States, honesty; and hard work. The blend of love or care, honesty, and hard work, I think goes a long way. Goes a long way toward contributing to community and, being the male figure we'd hope our men can be.
Yeah, and
And
I love what you just said, Michael. Sorry, Andrew. That we
yeah,
can't
no,
all be waiting for Superman. We have to be
Yeah.
the man that we can be in whatever situation. And I think that's, as we had the conversation with Brandon and Flavio, I was just saying that we need to be aware that there are many men within our spaces, but even ourselves, we don't need to wait for someone to come from outside. We just need to do something. But there are many men within our communities who are willing to be asked to speak or to engage or to mentor a boy. And it's just a question of creating that opportunity for them. And, they'll do it. Be the man that we can be, not having to wait for Superman to show up. I love that. I'm going to steal that, Michael. Love it.
I stole it from somewhere too, Eric. You might as well steal it from me.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to say something quickly that something that so as I was chatting with Lerato, I gotta make sure I pronounce it right. A minute ago, I spent some time in Limpopo Province, South Africa, which is in the northeast part, and the work that I did took me to lots of rural villages. I mean, really very rural places. And I saw things that I hadn't seen before in terms of um, just people going about their daily lives in a really interesting way, And so one thing that I saw was men holding each other's hands. And I hadn't really seen that before. And the young people from the University of Limpopo who were my research assistants um, they were just kind of telling me like, there's nothing romantic between them. They're just friends, actually. And that's something that friends do in they would talk about their own culture or their own society. So whether they were Venda or Chisanga or however, so I, I I'm not sure. One observation does not make a cultural generality, but I mean, anyone from the African continent here who might want to opine on that or offer that, Eric, you could talk to it, but I thought that it was a nice way to kind of model a kind of masculinity that wasn't kind of afraid of showing, care and friendship in a just a friendly way and uh, not any other kind of motive.
Mm.
Andrew, before you answer that, Eric, I unfortunately must sign off because I need to get to another location. But thank you so much for this, Eric and Andrew, for hosting it as you always do, and for everybody for being part of the conversation. This has just been fantastic.
Thank you,
So
Mike.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Appreciate
You have a lovely
Bye.
day.
we
it.
will stay in touch.
All right.
Michael.
Okay, guys, we can talk for maybe another 15 minutes or so. Um, but Eric, was that just one place, or is that somewhat, regular or normal in
So, they generally growing up, I think it's just a lot of modernization that has brought this idea that men shouldn't show affection to each other and for each other. But growing up, the expression of affection for friends and boys actually just spending a lot of time, because young men in this continent tend to spend a lot of time together. It's not frowned upon. Even when they begin to date, when they are in their late teens and they're beginning to show some interest in some girl, it would almost be like your friends are helping you,
Yeah.
pursue this girl, this damsel that you're interested in. They know that you're interested. You talk about it with them. You joke about it. When she's going to fetch water or firewood, or she's doing her homework, you're all sitting together. They're keeping you company. So that affection, through touch, was normal, but it's not as it used to be, growing up. I feel that there's been just this very, westernized influence where the idea of if you show affection to a man, then, you must be gay. Actually, I remember that I began hearing this phrase with our boys in our programs when, they would either touch a guy or, hug him or tell him they love him, and then they'd add no gay. They'd say that actually. Yeah,
Right.
they say that. They say no gay. Maybe now, from about maybe 6 or 7 years ago, that was the very first time I had, and I was remember wondering, oh, what does that mean? Where is that coming from? And it's just, I guess, with modernization, certain ideas are implanted around identity and how to show up, and you start to feel like, oh, if I show love, then people might think a certain way about me. So we've just seen that breakdown of, they don't show as much affection as they used to, I don't think, but it's still there, but not as much. At least
Yeah.
not in in the Gen Z generation. They've sort of built up such strict boundaries around
Yeah.
touch, especially, and just that
Mhm.
physical affection among boys.
Yeah. This sounds trivial, but I don't think it is. I think it's really important because in your, I mean, amazing presentation, you're my friend, so of course I think it's amazing, but you touched upon so many great ideas and ideas for us to actually use, some practical ideas, right?
Mhm.
And a lot of that had to do, as Mike was talking about caring and about showing that and making that part of your identity and not just the warrior identity, right? The kind of the warrior model of masculinity, of competition or domination or whatever. I'm not saying that that isn't part of your repertoire or mindset. Competition can be fun, but why reduce it all down to that, right? Why can't we have an expansive definition? And one thing that I talked about with Jackie is that, you know, on the one hand, Jackie was talking about, a victim mentality, on the other hand, maybe responsibility. But something I was saying was like maybe rehumanization, like just having a more like broader vision of like what it means to be human from like that male perspective. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's what I have to say. But I'm wondering, I've got a few people, there's a few people still here. I'm not sure if you'd be interested in jumping in, but I would love to hear from anyone else who hasn't chimed in yet. Even you, Lorato, you haven't said a lot. I would like to hear from you.
I mean, I was just thinking about your experience in Limpopo, and I wondered if you were able, if you ever engaged in some of the discussions with headmen. Because in rural areas in South Africa, what used to be homelands back in the day, they still very much run a traditional system. But what's quite interesting is depending on which one you go to, there are very different traditions and cultures around how people are brought up. So for instance, in Limpopo, actually, women are quite strong in leadership and all of that. But what is really important is the values that the nations and the North actually embody. They are all about community. They're all about love and service. And you can see how a lot of young people, even though they will leave the homelands and come to, urban areas to go study and everything, they still have a very strong connection to home. I have seen a lot of friends of mine who do come from the North, their values that have been instilled in them around being, what it means to be a man and how to raise a family and how to take care of not just your own, but the other people within the community. So much so that most of them adopt a child that isn't even from the family. So it might be someone's child from down the road whose mother passed away, or whatever the case may be. So they do a lot of that. But what's different about cultures in the south of South Africa. So if the Zulu, Xhosa, so the Nguni tribes, a lot of their culture is around bravado and violence and, that kind of culture. And you'll see it a lot in it's not a lovely statistic to talk about, but if you want a hitman in South Africa, you must go to KZN because that is what they embody, violence, right? And you can see what the difference is between the two approaches in what you value as a society or as a community actually plays out in that way. So if you go to the North, a lot of young people have developed their homes. Every year, once a year, they all do this great migration. They go back home, and they're supporting their towns and villages in developing the area. That's not happening in the South. A lot of them will move up and they just never go back. So that's actually quite an interesting contrast.
Oh, thank you for that. We're definitely gonna have to keep the conversation going, Lerato, because what I've did my major research on was actually this concept of rootedness and the benefits of that. And hearing young people talk about their roots and how important they were to them. And yeah, they wanted to get a job in Joburg or Cape Town or Durbs or whatever, but they had that sense of community, that sense of identity based in their community, and it would be. But the contrast is interesting too. I kind of remember Jacob Zuma when he was president. He used to really play up and there's a name for the dance that he would do as the chief, etc. You know, so it's really evocative. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I want to actually, while we have still a little more time, because we're talking about African contexts and uh, the continent comprises many different cultures and languages and histories. And I think from outside, often people just look at Africa as one place, but it's actually many cultures and many histories. And even Lorato's example of the North and the South, the Nguni and the you know is it what the it's Nguni and sorry. It's Nguni languages and Bantu languages. Is that the difference?
Yes, Nguni and Bantu, but
Okay.
we call it Batu in the North.
Right. Okay. I wanted to make sure because I know Bantu has had a negative connotation over the years. So I just need to make sure I got that right. So, so yeah, just as there's some Americans here, there's some Africans here. I just want to maybe just talk about that for a second. Maybe the differences, something that we can learn. Um, I could probably I could talk for a long time about what I learned, and I've talked with Eric at length about this, of the incredible feeling of community that I felt, and I felt incredibly welcomed. And I'm an outsider, and I'm actually a signifier of a lot of negative things, to be honest with you. But I was welcomed and loved, and I formed incredible friendships, and I felt welcomed and loved in those communities, and it made a real mark on me, and I learned a lot about how to be a better human being, from my experience there. And so I'm very receptive, and I learned a lot just from your presentation, Eric, about how young men that there's a lot of resources there. Young men from Africa, it just, from their upbringing, from some values there, a lot to offer the world. I think that's an important conversation. I don't know. Anyone want to
It
comment?
is. It is. Let me just make a quick comment also as I respond to a message I've seen from Lydia. We, because of globalization and just, becoming a bit more capitalistic in our thinking and the way we show up in society, what has happened is a lot of those structures of mentorship, and that's what Lydia is alluding to, where financial success, it has almost become that if you're not financially successful, then you can't be a mentor. Then you can't speak to people. People won't give you the time of day. They don't think you have anything to say, which is not necessarily true, because I definitely wouldn't want Elon Musk to speak to my son, No, absolutely no way, So it's just finding, like sort of rebuilding those systems and structures, those spaces that mentored and spoke to boys, because we need, and Lydia says it perfectly well, sort of emphasizing on the value in humanity. Who am I as a human being, and how do I participate and show up in society, and then recreating or ensuring that those spaces are nurtured and encouraged. Because that, because of the idea of modernization, moving away from those rural and traditional settings and moving into urban cities and urban centers, whether it's for education or work, a lot of those things sort of get lost. Yeah. Where we are aware that we sit and listen to the wisdom of our elders, and our elders are not necessarily my grandfather or the older person in my family, but within the community, there's a sect of elders who speak into some of these concerns. I just feel like it's a pull between those who still want things to remain the way they used to be. Within those actually circles of elders, there are those within those circles who want things to go back the way they were. There are those who are modernized and are thinking forward. And then there is the young person who is caught up in success. Yeah. And trying to win success. Anyway, I think Lydia wants to say something. Hi, Lydia.
Oh, hi. How you doing?
Mzuri.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, hey,
Yes.
Lydia.
Hey, Andrew. Yeah, Eric, I'm very happy that you explained my question better than I probably would have. So thank you for that. Yeah, but I do find that observation to be so real. And unfortunately, it's becoming even more considered than just people who have made it in their own small ways, but have not been financially successful most of the time. And I say this from even my own children, because I have 3 boys, but in conversations we've had, you notice most times, especially one who is looking for a job right now, when you try to refer him to different people who can hire him, he's more concerned in knowing how well the people you're sending him to are doing financially, instead of thinking of even the smaller people who are starting out and are succeeding in whatever it is. Because the message here is you have to start somewhere. You can't just ignore the people who are making less money and working hard, because they're giving out a certain value of showing up to a job. Because being successful is not only about money. It's also knowing how to interact with the world as a whole. And that's something I've found that is missing even in schools. They're not teaching them, that we are not educating you to be just citizens of the world who are successful financially, but we are educating you to be citizens of the world who can work and create bridges and get to the level of those who have made it and those who haven't made it, and see how we can get to a medium. And that's something I would like very much to be emphasized on, and especially to boys, because if they're not making money, they think they're not successful. And that's a loss.
Yeah.
So let's focus on that too. That money is not the value, is not the litmus test for how successful you've become in life, or you will become in life. I mean, it's an incentive, but it shouldn't be the only reason you are trying very hard to be somebody.
Amazing. Thank you, Lydia. I completely agree. And actually, it aligns with something that as we were having our breakout session with Brandon, that a lot of, and Brandon mentioned actually that, guys leaving university, they begin to struggle with their identity because who am I if I'm not a student? I used to be, whether it's in sports, I did well, now I'm going to the world. Who am I? How do I participate? And the idea that, we've sold our young men, and the manosphere has actually done a splendid job in this, where the idea of make a lot of money, drive a supercar, and have a bevy of beautiful women as a mark of success, which is not true, And then we do not show young men that, especially in their early 20s, and we tell our boys, participate in areas where you're learning. Don't be caught up with thinking that this is the time to make millions of dollars or the next big thing. Tech bros and all these different ideas that have sort of permeated the meaning and purpose and utility and identity for many young men. Just bringing them back and telling them, listen, participate in things that make you better. Participate in work that enhances your capacities and your capabilities. Go to places that challenge you, not necessarily make you a lot of money. And I know that one of the young men actually that currently working with and mentoring, he's been trying to get into this big McKinsey consultancy firms. And I was telling him, go to places where you're going to learn, a lot of hands-on experiences, places that are going to stretch you, places that are going to teach you management, teamwork, and all these different things. Don't go into an organization that just sets you behind a desk and gives you instructions on what to do without you having some hands-on experience. And I feel like that is what is missing for many young men, and just the idea that, if you make a lot of money, then you're a person, then you're a man, which is not true. It's a very dangerous idea. And that's why a lot of young men just, when they fail financially, they feel like failures. Yeah. And they are caught in that cycle and web of, then who am I if I'm failing? And then just get caught up in, for some of the communities and countries where gambling is a big thing, it's because I want to make money. Because money then assigns value to me. Money then means I'm a man. So breaking away, and that's why like the I Decide program for us is so important, because it's about value. These are the values that define masculinity. These are the values that help you show up in life in a powerful and strong way without being defined by certain either material goods or certain roles that you're supposed to play. Yeah. But anyway, Andrew, I see that we've run out of time, but thank you as well. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I'd like to maybe one more. I'd like to invite Vincent, if you'd like to chime in. You had a nice question there in the chat about engaging students at the university. Would you like to comment on that?
Hello.
Hi, Vincent.
Hi, too.
Would you like to comment or ask a question based on what you put in the chat?
All right. My concern is based on we are trying to build up men to be strong people, and this is following what is happening. The toxic masculinity has affected us most of the time, and I'm talking from the aspect of sexual and gender-based violence on the issues of intimate partner violence, which has been more on men. And most of the time when I try to have engagement with my fellow colleagues, they challenge me that we have no data Like when you talk about things like sexual assault on women, you will get that they will tell you like 1 in 3. But what about men? Is it 0 in 3? So how can we invest so that we ensure that we have if it is not research, we can have some data and maybe do some surveys and let them be online so that people who are looking into it, they see the urgency of having men into the conversation. That was my concern.
Thanks, Vincent. And Vincent, of course, is busy in Kenya, and we've had such harrowing reports and issues that have been happening around gender-based violence and actually violence against women and girls specifically, that actually just may make your blood boil, and you're like, how is this possible? Of course, there's a lot. So the other thing maybe I hadn't mentioned earlier as we began is maybe just to respond to Vincent as well, is I do sit in the national committee that is concerned with male engagement, both in issues of sexual violence and economics and all these different areas of development. And one of the things that we've been keen on, and we are doing a lot more now, the government is actively participating in it, is where is the research, but then how are we showing up in the communities? So there are different working groups that, Vincent would be happy to actually partner with you and probably have sessions within the university, because we've noticed the other thing, that has become very clear in our community is a lot of gender-based violence is happening within learning institutions. So it's, campus students that either just started, fell in love in campus, began to live together, just, a few years after graduation, and something happens. So that is becoming a bit more common. And we are beginning to notice that it's because within those spaces, there's a prevailing idea that is both insidious in its nature and dangerous, but also there are no platforms to assist the women, but also to help the young men just learn and understand how to engage and relate to the opposite gender. But again, there is also not enough information, Vincent, like you've mentioned, about that form of GBV, but women against men, which is also there. We've had cases of some dangerous things happening, and just what do we do? How do we begin to engage? So there are some programs, and I've shared with you my email. There are some programs that are there, and there are some government offices and parties that are actually doing things in different universities. And I'm sure at your university in Kericho, there's probably an office within the county that is involved with that. But yes, there is need for more engagement. There is need for more talking. Spaces, like I've said, spaces and places where young men and women can participate and just learn how to relate and be together without it being influenced by the negative aspects of masculinity.
Eric, I have to say that last part really, I think, hits home, because if you provide a more positive model of masculinity that is not defined by, in the hetero space, like how many women that you date, right? Or the desirability or what have you, right? These kind of status conscious things, right? Money, right? If you provide a different model, now it's not going to happen overnight, but you do have to do the work. And that's what I really appreciate about organizations like yours, is that you're doing the work and helping younger men think differently about a positive vision of masculinity that isn't measured by these things. One final point, and I'm a little torn on this one because it's depressing, but talking about unemployment rate. And last week in Chicago, I gave a presentation on some of the work that I've done in South Africa. And I said, when I started working there, the youth unemployment rate was 40%. And Lerato, you can say this, it's probably about the same now. You know, the unemployment rate of, let's say, young people that can be defined maybe between 18 and 25 or 18 and 30 is still around 40%. And in Kenya, I I heard a number of 60%. You can correct me, please, but this is a major problem, because we have the vision, but we also have the reality, right? We have the reality, we have the vision. People, young men are still judged on what kind of job they have, and if they don't have work, they can feel worthless. And that is not, it's not irrational either, because that's the society's value. Yeah. I know it's not the most cheery idea to talk about, but I'm wondering if we could discuss that for a little bit as we wrap up. Do you have any
So
comments
yeah,
on
I
that?
think
Yeah.
I can speak to that, Andrew, because I'm actually in the career development space. I work at ALA. There's a program between ALA and the Mastercard Foundation Scholars Program, and it's called Africa Career Networks.
Mm,
And our core function is to support our young leaders who have had a transformational educational opportunity to transition into careers of impact. And what we're seeing a lot is over the years, we have built lots of partnerships with global organizations, US, UK, all parts of Europe, and growing in Africa. But there's a huge challenge on the continent is in that actually skills development at the early career side or in the early career space is not considered something important on this continent, right?
mm,
So
mm,
our big multinationals who do have offices in Africa and the likes are still running structured graduate recruitment programs, but
mm,
other organizations that were born in Africa are not focused on it. They're not
mm,
skilling young people, and therefore, and they don't believe in actually engaging young people because they think it costs too much. Young people break things, et cetera, all sorts of negative stories. And the reality is that our work is around partnering with those who are doing it very well to kind of advocate for Africa to upskill Africans. We know all the
mm,
statistics. Within about 5 years, Africa will have the largest working age population in the world, but we are nowhere near where we need to be for that unprecedented opportunity,
mm,
skills-wise. So
mhm,
how
mhm,
do we move the needle? How do we
mm,
bring people into spaces, so business leaders, leaders from academic institutions, career services professionals, everyone into one room and have
mm,
conversations around let's engage our young people positively and how they can build their careers. An even more interesting thing is, Africa set out to create all these young entrepreneurs, but they're still not talking to entrepreneurs about the importance of creating jobs. So
yeah.
a lot of young Africans are going out there and starting businesses and learning, a lot of important business skills. They're even becoming successful, but some of them will even, raise a lot of capital and suddenly become quite successful overnight, raising hundreds and thousands of dollars in capital and things like that. But they'll only employ 5 people.
Mm, right.
Right? You
Yeah.
haven't necessarily thought through about the responsibility that lies on you to actually create livelihoods for others. So
Yeah.
that is part of our conversations that we need to have as we're
Yeah.
talking to young people, as we're talking to employers, as we're talking to civil society organizations around these are all the different parts, and everyone has got a responsibility, everyone has got a voice, and everyone's got something to contribute. So in the career development space, I think there's a lot of programs. MasterCard is one of the organizations that are really doing well in that space. Mercy Corps is quite big on supporting young people in growth and development. And there are lots of organizations doing the great work, but it's not enough. So we need to continue on building in that, and it's partnerships that will help us get there.
Mm. Wow, fantastic. You turned something that could have been kind of depressing into something really positive. And I'm feeling hopeful about that. And not to plug GPN, but we'd be more than happy to talk further for sure, because that's something that we are dedicated to. Absolutely.
Happy to.
Yeah. So I'd like to give Leah the last word, if you don't mind. Leah, you want to chime in? See, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, hi everyone. I think I appreciate the discussion that is happening right now. And I just wanted to comment on the issues of jobs. And one thing that we have tried to emphasize from a space of Riara University, which is based in Nairobi, and that has been one thing that even the Vice Chancellor has tried to run with and make sure to emphasize to the students throughout, is that we don't have to create a community that require jobs, that is looking for employment. We need to produce products of students that are entrepreneur and that create jobs, not a community that seeks employment. And I think that is one goal that we have been missing as a society, where we are all looking at, how do I apply for a job? Now we need to look at it at a different angle, being our main motto that we nurture innovators. When you get out of the university, are you looking to be an employer or are you looking to be an employee? From the space of the 4 years you're in the university or the 2 years you're in the university, why don't you start innovating something that by the end of the time you become an entrepreneur, an innovator, and you create jobs rather than you seeking for a job? And that is where mentorship comes in, because we are going to hold the hands of these students to tell them that we are making you ready to go create jobs, not to go look for jobs. I think that is something that I think is a discussion we need to really emphasize on. And I can tell you it works if you nurture it from the time they get into the university. Thank you.
Amazing. I think Leah and Lerato should connect
I was
and
just going to
talk.
say, please,
Yeah.
please
Yeah.
connect.
Yeah.
Can I piggyback on what Leah just said?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So one thing I noticed, I haven't been in that space for a very long time, but one thing I've noticed is that they got rid of vocational schools. And in doing that, we lost a lot of young people, because in getting into the industrial kind of work, because they had nowhere to go, because all these vocational schools had been turned into universities. And we all know how competitive it is to go into the university in Kenya. So most people who did not make the grade to go to the universities ended up having nowhere to go, because vocational schools were kind of absorbing the children who did not make it to the universities, but could still be educated to have these skills that they can do self-employment. They can get self-employment with. So I think we also need to encourage our governments to consider bringing back vocational schools and affordable vocational schools, and not just affordable for the sake of it, but well-equipped vocational schools that are equipped with modern equipment, and every facility has to have what is needed today. If we do that, we will be able to alleviate a lot of lack of jobs for these youngsters. Because the other thing is, our schools, again, I'm Kenyan, so our schools also encourage us to just do white-collar jobs. White-collar jobs are just that. You don't grow in them. But when you're able to go to a vocational school, you learn skills that you can actually create jobs for others. So let's get into public policies. I know we are agitating a lot about our upcoming elections. These are things we need to focus on what we need from our leaders.
Yeah.
Let's not just focus on, oh, they're taxing us too much. We need to focus on how we can create these jobs so we can actually pay these taxes, because we would be proud to pay the taxes. But but we do need the jobs that will afford us to pay the taxes and still live our lives. So let's fight for the vocational schools to come back. That's all I wanted to add to Leah's point.
Thanks, Lydia. Andrew, let me mention something. Oh, Leah, you wanted to say something?
I was saying thank you.
Thanks, Leah. Yes, of course, especially within the continent of Africa, vocational training is extremely important, and we have seen, unfortunately, a lot of our politicians just play around in that sector. Our former government did do a lot of work in institutionalizing TVETs, now what they're called TVETs, which are training vocational educational centers, which are coming back up. Maybe what is not there, what we haven't been able to do extremely well is just capacity within these centers to help our young men. In this continent, to appease our young men, what happens with our politicians, unfortunately, is we give them motorbikes, something that will give them some quick money in their pockets. There are parts of this continent where roads have become, you can't drive around. Like, there are more motorbikes actually than people, than human beings. And it's simply because it's the quickest way to appease the needs of our young men. So breaking away, of course, from those things and giving them skills and bringing them back to schools and, the TVET centers, the vocational centers, that is important. Like Lerato mentioned earlier, and they're doing some amazing work as the Africa Careers Network, is that we are looking at having the largest workforce in the entire world, literally. Like, in another 10 years, I think the statistics say 2 in every 5 teenagers or young people will be African or something like that. Like, we are going to have the largest workforce in the world. And I'm not sure that we've done enough to prepare them. And when we've prepared them for, those, whether it's tech or whatever, it's the employee, like Lerato mentioned earlier, it's a team of about 5 or 10. And they are not innovating for industry, which is what we need to do. Manufacturing and industry, where a lot of the vocational training will come in. Whether it's in mechanics or engineering and all these different things. Engineering doesn't have to be you've gone to university. It can be just the vocational part of it. So there's something there. Thank you, Lydia, for mentioning it. And those are some of the places we also implement our programs in the vocational schools. And I feel like it just needs to happen a bit more. A lot needs to be done. And something is being done. We just need to now sort of multiply it, have a multiply effect for different parts of the continent and different sectors, universities, vocational schools, and all these different places where we can begin to not only mentor boys on values and what it means to be a man, but how to participate in society in a positive way.
Eric, on that note, one final comment has come in from Andrew Matenge, and it looks like he's in transit, so he hasn't been able to join vocally, but he says in the chat, I want to know more what is working elsewhere around building young men to real men, dealing with their sexuality versus identity. In uni, many young men prove they are men by sexual engagements or drinking, etc. I think that speaks, I think you spoke very well to that in your presentation, Eric. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah. So, this idea that, and it's a pretty modern idea and capitalistic in nature, where, the number of girls or women that you bed then mean that you're a man. And then beginning to, within our rites of passage experiences and, processes rather, is that now you're a man, now go sleep, go have sex, go do this. And what has worked and what continues to work, at least for us, what I've seen here in Kenya, and a bit actually also in South Africa, is the idea that how do your participation in community and society is what defines and determines whether you're a man or not. And that's why I began by saying that men are made. And the men we have in society are the men that we have made. Whether positive or negative, we made them. They were made by the systems and the structures that have been in place. So what has worked is, especially in unis, and I mentioned this earlier, is having these groups of young men. And that's why I mentioned that, the old boys club had a thing. There are many things that are bad about them, but there are certain aspects that are very, very good and healthy for young men, for the development of young men. There's those spaces where they participate in doing things for society, solving a problem or a challenge within a community and a society. Andrew has said this to me before. It's, go paint a school, go build a roof for a school. Those are the things that actually enhance the sense of masculinity for many young men, because they involve a bit of hands-on, but there is an outcome, a positive outcome for others. There's this idea that I've had both Richard Reeves actually talk about that I find very fascinating, and it's true, that there are in many cultures, a boy was considered to become a man when his utility or his contribution to society was greater than his consumption. That I'm no longer just a consumer and I'm taking, I'm now contributing. And when his participation in society was greater than what he consumes, then he has begun his journey of masculinity. And let me actually finish by saying this, that masculinity is not I know we speak about masculinity a lot, but masculinity is not a destination. It's not a prize that we acquire and hold on to. Masculinity is a journey. It's a lifelong thing. It's a thing that you do every day. It's the way you show up for your society and community every day. There is no end. There's no destination that we get to and we say, now I'm here, now I'm a man and I'm a man forever and ever and ever and ever. No. It's how you show up every day in your life and the things that you do. So to respond to Andrew, there are those aspects and those spaces. And that's why spaces are powerful and important, to help young men break away from the idea that having sex or having many girls makes me a man. Having more money makes me a man. Being the loudest makes me a man. Drinking the most makes me a man, because that's the reality of especially college and uni men, young men in uni and colleges. The idea of masculinity is more macho than it is service. So service is very, very key. Spaces and places where they participate in doing things for society and their community. And then that becomes the thing that is celebrated around, now you're a man. Now you've started the journey of masculinity in the things that you do for society and for others. So thank you. Thank you. Let me finish by saying thank you very much to everyone who has participated. Thank you for your thoughts and ideas. This was lovely and wonderful. Thank you for hosting us, Andrew. I invite you to engage and interact with us on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on all the different platforms on the work that we do. We are happy to engage and find ways to partner and work together and collaborate and just implement our programs in different places. If there are places where you're in that you'd like our content and our material, we are happy to engage on that conversation with you and give you the content and the material and, support you in whichever way for you to begin impacting young men positively. Thank you very much, Andrew. Asante sana. And do have a good day and a lovely evening, everyone else.
Thank you,
Eric,
too.
thank you. And thank you everyone for participating. This is wonderful. Really world-class stuff here, guys. Amazing. Just make sure, please, that you provide some contact information so you can keep in touch with each other. I know that we've had some really good connections here, and it would be a shame to not provide a means for that. So if you could put your information in the chat or find a way to connect with each other. And I've asked for people to put their information in the chat, your emails. So feel free to go ahead and put that in the chat, and we can hang on for another minute or so people can do that and share information with each other. Because I think it is important to keep the conversation going and build things together. It's all about talking is wonderful, but this is just about, getting our ideas straight and encouraging each other and building relationships. But at some point, we're going to turn that into action. And we have, right? We've all been engaged, but let's continue to encourage each other to do that. So I see some information here in the chat. Please feel free to go ahead and copy that information and get that information. But in the meantime, thank you again, Eric. Fantastic job and wonderful conversation. Have a great one.
Yes, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I'll
Bye.
respond
Thank
to
you.
Andrew. I've gotten your question. I'll email you. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric.
Fantastic.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks, everyone.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right.